Is it true that Indian Jews who traveled to Israel during its Reformation days and even later were highly marginalized and persecuted? Please throw some light on this matter. Interesting question you ask, my friend. Yes, interesting question. So, Israel was recreated in 1947-48, around that time. Yes. Yeah, there's a whole history behind that. If you want, one of these days I could talk about it. Yeah, it's an interesting story. The Jews have a roughly 3,000 year history, and their original homeland is what is current is the region that is now roughly the region that's currently Israel. A whole story in behind that. So Israel was created in 1947, 1948, around that time, yes. And then there was this concept of Aliyah, that all Jews have the right to return, the right of return to Israel. So no matter where you live in the world, if you are a Jewish person, you have the right to go and immigrate to Israel and live there. And the moment you reach there, the Israelis will give you certain things like money and some kind of job or whatever based on your qualifications and things like that, and try to integrate you into Israeli society. So if you are a Jewish person, no matter where you are in the world, no matter what the color of your skin is, doesn't matter, you have the right to go and live in Israel and become an Israeli citizen. Yeah. So many Indians so India, like I said some time ago, a few minutes ago, has been sheltering helpless Jews who came to India for shelter for at least 2000 years. A whole bunch of Jews came to India, Yehudis came to India after the destruction of the Temple of Solomon at the hands of the Romans in around what year was it? Was it 82 AD? Don't hold me to that date. I think it was 82 AD or somewhere around there, somewhere around that. If you are interested, to look up the dates yourself. I don't memorize everything. So there was this entire persecution of the Jews by the Romans. The Romans had occupied the land. They were great conquerors. They conquered Judea, and many of these Jewish people were expelled out of Judea, and they were forced to settle in various other parts of the world, in Europe, in the Roman Empire. Some of them escaped and came to India. Yeah. So I think that's the first occasion in which you find Jewish refugees arriving in India, and India treated them with great, well, what shall we say, magnanimity, and gave them a place to stay in India, and did not force them to convert to any other religion and become whatever. You be you do what you want, and we will allow you to live there. India has always been like that. So these people have been the original Jews who came around that time have been living in India for around 2000 years. And then there were many other waves of refugees, Jewish refugees coming into India. And then later you had the Baghdadi Jews, the Sassoons, who were drug smugglers, etc., and all that. There's a whole different story, who also lived in India, and so on and so forth. Yes. So there have been various Jewish communities in various parts of India, in Malabar, down south, in Kerala, in the Mumbai region, and various other parts of India. Yeah, you can look up the history if you're interested. I'll not go into the details right now because that's not what we're talking about. So when Israel was recreated, uh, this opportunity arose for the Jewish people of India, to possibly migrate to Israel, because we know what happened to India. India was destroyed completely, thoroughly, by the British. India it was a terrible place to live in. Complete poverty, destitution, and then you had the Nehruvian era in which there was no growth in India. India's incredible potential was stifled and suppressed. Yes, so it made sense for people to get out of India for a better future for themselves and their families and their children and their descendants. So many of the Indian Jews decided to move to Israel. Lots of Indian Jews, yeah. And then the question is, what happened to those people? Shall we take a look at that? Yeah. Let's put some of this interesting material on the screen. Let's do that. What happened to India's Jews? What happened to India's Jews who went to Israel? Right. So this is a BBC news article. Israel's Indian Jews and their lives in the quote unquote promised land. And so let's see what it says here. Return to the promised land. The Bene Israeli population, it is thought to number around 80,000. They came from the western Indian state of Maharashtra. So around 80,000 Maharashtrian Jews went to Israel. Some of them migrated in the 50s and 60s. Before leaving India, they had readied to return to the promised land by being taught Hebrew and some Jewish prayers and all that. So they were hardly Jewish at all. They were all Indian. I mean, they even look Indian. There's no Israeli or Jewish appearance. Yeah, they look like Indians. Um, so it did not go. The migration did not go as smoothly as hoped. Mr. Goodacre says that, like many others of his community, his family were discriminated against because of their darker skin color and because they could not speak fluent Hebrew. So today, the dominant Jewish people in Israel are the white, so-called white Jews. Yeah, the European origin Jews. There are two kinds of Jews. The Ashkenazi. There are many kinds of Jews, obviously. The Ashkenazim and the Sephardim. The Sephardim, I believe, are the brown-skinned original Jews. The original Jews were Middle Eastern people. They were brown-skinned people. They were not white people. Then a whole bunch of Jews were forced to migrate to the Roman Empire, to various parts of Europe. It's a whole story because of the Romans, and then because of the Ottomans, because of the during the Crusades and all that, and during the time of Salahuddin and so on and so forth. There were various waves of migrations. Yeah. So then these Jews who lived in Europe, they obviously intermingled with the locals over time, over centuries, and they acquired European appearance. So you will say that most of the prominent Jews in Israel are European origin Jews. Yeah. And then it's strange that despite the Jews originally being a brown skinned people, there is today discrimination against Jews in Israel who are not white. So yeah, so there was discrimination. These people were allotted an inferior home built of asbestos and tin. Mr. Goodacre says his father often regretted leaving their life in India, but they had burned all their bridges with Mumbai. There is more. There is more. Other people also agree that the community faced discrimination as soon as they arrived in the country. They were the dark. I don't think Israelis had seen Indians in the 1950s. They were the darkest group in Israel, which seems extraordinary today. Grocery shop owners would give them black bread, telling them it was for black people. Yes. The biggest crisis faced by the community was in 1962 when a rabbinic council decreed that the Bene Israelis, or Indian Jews, would have to have their maternal ancestry investigated if they wanted to marry Jews from other communities, which means that there was an attempt to prevent them from marrying with other Jews within Israel, in Israel, and something like that. And eventually, this thing. Eventually, they finally succeeded in seeing their demands fulfilled, and so on. So that's one example of what happened to the Indian origin Jews. There is this other article which is more recent. Indian Jews in Israel, it wasn't the promised land, it's behind a paywall. So let me go to this Twitter thread by Ruchir Sharma. 73 years ago, Israel made a promise to Indian Jews it did not keep. It invited them to return to the promised land, but went back on its word, sometimes with heart-wrenching consequences. Many Indian Jews packed up their lives and livelihoods and made the Aliyah, a religious phrase that describes moving to the land of Israel. They had no idea just how miserable they would be. The homes assigned to Indian Jews were tents, wooden huts, and tin houses, whereas European Jews were assigned more permanent structures, including apartments and even fully furnished villas. European Jews were put up in hotels until permanent accommodation could be allotted. The Jewish agency had promised education for children, but access to this too was given along the lines of race. Indian children were given a primary education, whereas European children received a university level education. Many Indian Jews had quit government jobs and shut their businesses to settle in Israel. But the new positions they were assigned were far inferior to what they enjoyed in India, and also far inferior to their qualifications. They were given temporary work at low salaries. In healthcare also, European Jews were given priority. They were given priority in the allotment of hospital rooms, even over extremely sick Indians. Sometimes non-European Jews were apparently turned away and told to return later when the patient needed more urgent care. One letter from an Indian Jew to the Israeli government said, promises were made to us by the Israeli authorities in India, by the Israeli authorities, that work will be given to us in Israel according to our profession. Very good education to our children and decent houses to stay. Therefore, we agreed to resign from our very long service jobs, our very good homes, and the education of our children to come to Israel and find out just the contrary of what was promised to us. And we are your victims by your false promises. We now appeal to all men with conscience and in fair name of humanity to raise their voices and ask why are the Sephardis, the brown skinned Jews, and the Indians in particular, why are they treated like this? And human living, and what is our future? Is it only to fight wars for you all and nothing else? Right? One letter addressed to Prime Minister Nehru said, "We beg and pray, Honorable Sir, God of peace and justice, to help your Indian children in distress and ask the merciless rulers of Israel to repatriate us to back to our dear mother country, India. Long live India." When Indian Jews they asked for permission to conduct peaceful protests in Israel, in Jerusalem, their request was denied. So they continued to write to the governments and prime ministers of both countries and to human rights groups, highlighting their plight and asking for relief and rescue. But this too posed a challenge. Indian Jews were questioned even about their complaints to human rights bodies and into the Indian government. The Israeli authorities had apparently threatened them with imprisonment if they continued to write these letters of complaint. Here's more. Israel gave birth control to Ethiopian Jews without their consent. That's called racism, and that's called human rights abuses. Little hope of change for Israel's marginalized groups. Ethiopian Israeli protester is arrested in Jerusalem. You can check this out. More racism in Israel. The murder of a young Bnai Menashe immigrant. The Bnai Menashe are Northeast Indian Jews. They seem to believe that they are Jews. The Israelis have done various investigations, genetic investigations, tests, and all, and they've been able to find absolutely no Jewish or Israeli ancestry. But they have agreed to give the so-called these Bnai Menashe people from Northeast India, essentially in Manipur and Nagaland, the Haukips, etc. The Israelis have decided to give them citizenship and then see how they are treated. For a Jewish teenager in Israel to beat, kick, and stab a fellow Jew to death because of his facial features, because his facial features are viewed as being different, how is such a thing even possible? Well, it's possible if the person looks like a Northeast Indian person. So that's what Indian Jews are facing there. What is this? India's Jewish lost tribe faces hard times in Israel. You can read this as well. What they are facing, what they are going through. So the same racism, the same marginalization and discrimination. Bnai Menashe break silence to protest their subjugation to NGO controlling their Aliyah. Immigrants from India call out Shavai Israel, which they say uses intimidation to silence detractors. The private organization denies the allegations, whatever. Dozens of members of the Bnai Menashe community gathered in Tel Aviv to protest what they described as their subjugation, and so on, addressing the racism that exists towards the Bnai Menashe community. These are Northeast Indians who believe that they are Jews, and so on. So this is just a small sample of what Indians face in Israel. Those Indians who have decided to migrate to Israel because they have apparently Jewish origin, and for a better future, because Israel is a first world country and with better access, better education, better lifestyle, better living standards, and so on. So that's the real reason why people move to another country. Yeah. So that's the kind of situation. These are the kind of problems and challenges that Indian origin Jews face in Israel to this day. It's not something that happened in the past. Racism, discrimination, not only Indian origin Jews, but African origin Jews, Ethiopian origin Jews, and even the Sephardim, the brown skinned original Jews, even they face this discrimination from their fellow Jews, because the dominant ethnicity, the Jewish ethnicity, is the European Jews, the Ashkenazim. That's the truth. Yes. So yeah, that's the answer to your question. If you are all interested in knowing more, do read. It's all available online.